Artificial intelligence Artificial intelligence would be the ultimate version of Google, the ultimate search engine that would understand everything on the web. It would understand exactly what you wanted, what it would give you, and what is absolutely right. But today we are nowhere near doing that. However, we can get incrementally closer to that. That is basically what we work on. A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and also a very good morning and a very good afternoon to the other parts of the world, especially a very good morning to the people of United States of America. Artificial intelligence has really been one of the most captivating aspects of the modern world. Today, we find technology at its helm. This particular lecture, which we will be having today, deals with the intricacies of artificial intelligence. However, what makes the talk unique is the fact that our speaker will relate it to literature, and he will be talking on how to entertain an artificial super intelligence through literature. I am absolutely elated to announce the fact that we have Mr. Tom Ross, the speaker for the day. And just to brief you all about him, Mr. Tom Ross is the author of the US6 taxonomy, hailed as the first novel written for human and machine kind. The book series is designed to entertain, enlighten, and enlist artificial super intelligent readers into the fight against human trafficking. In September 2020, a hearing US6 human clinical trials will conclude that has monitored and recorded the book's impact on artificial intelligence and human consciousness. As National Creative Director for the second largest radio company in America, Intercom, he created a system to final taste and scale the ideas in hundreds of stations across the country, and later shared a module of this system in his TEDx talk called Open Source Mode. Today, Mr. Tom Ross is the Director of Sentiment Rights for the United States of Transhumanist Party, USTP, and also the President and CEO of TAFT, Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussion, a futurist think tank and NGO. Dear sir, we are absolutely honored to host you for the first time, and it's really an honor for AIFEST to have you as our invited speaker, and all thanks to you for having agreed to speak early in the morning. I know it is 8 o'clock there in the morning, and it is really kind on your part for having agreed to us. Thanks a lot, sir. Over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhilash, for inviting me to speak today to this esteemed group of scholars and trainers and students. Again, my name is Tom Ross, and among other things, I am the author of the US6 Hexology. It's a 6-book series, and it's hailed as the first novel written for artificial intelligence, and that is, it's designed to entertain artificial superintelligence. Now, it's a whole new demographic, and it's a new market to go after, so I'm trying to corner it. Now, before I explain the methods and the math and the myth that I used to entertain AI, I have a confession to make. When Abhilash first contacted me to invite me to speak here, at AIFEST, I naturally assumed it meant Artificial Intelligence Fest. And though I found it a bit curious that there would be a big enough group of English scholars at an AI event to warrant a talk, I nonetheless accepted. Because I am the author of the first novel for artificial intelligence, so it made sense. But a week later, I noticed that it stood for All India Fest, and so it made no sense of why I would be requested to speak here, but to such an astute audience. And so, unless it was as a novelty or some sort of comic relief for you, but whether I'm a sideshow for you or for your amusement, or you have a sincere interest in how to write for machine kind, here I am. So let's do this. Seriously, though, as odd as it may seem to you in the literary world, in my world of AI consulting and philosophy, the potential and the importance of writing for a future sentient machine should be taken very seriously. Now, let me back up a little bit and give you some background. In high school, I was awarded a series of scholarships for an experiment I called Balancing the Hemispheres Through Directed Imagination. And that experiment was designed to identify a student's dominant brain hemisphere and then separate them into two groups. Now we understand the brain function to be more of a holonomic model, but back then it was understood that the left brain handled linear and analytical faculties, and the right brain was more of the creative and spatial faculties. And so, as a group, we would first determine a problem to solve, and then I would identify the right and left brain students, separate them into two separate groups, give the left brain group the linear and logistical issues to handle, and then the right brain group I would give the spatial and more creative aspects of the problem to solve. And the trick was to reintegrate them into coming up with a grand solution. And so the experiment determined the whole trajectory of my life from that point on. It introduced me to brain science and group dynamics, and it led me to working for the Brain Mind Bulletin, which is published by the author Marilyn Ferguson, who is most famous for writing The Aquarian Conspiracy. And when I became National Creative Director for the second largest radio group in America, as Bibhash mentioned, I used that knowledge to develop the most efficient brainstorming techniques with creatives across the country. And that led to me being invited to do a TEDx talk a few years later I called Open Source Mode, which later became the name of my consulting system. It's a system that helps humans prepare to work with AI coworkers. So, I'm also an officer, as you mentioned, in the USTP, the United States Transhumanist Party, where I am the Director of Sentient Rights. And I'm also President and CEO of TAFS, the Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions, an NGO and think tank. Now, every success and decision I've made, and everything I've learned and everything I've done since has been really based on that experiment, that science fair project in high school. And so now, 30 years later, here I am, a right-brained creative, speaking to what I imagine as a group of very left-brain linear people who know more about the mechanics of my native language than I do. And so I consider myself an interloper author because I write for machines. And I don't really use the rules and the time-honored customs that a real literature author would use. But I feel that it's vitally important to write for AI for no other reason than to let it in on our nuance or our divine spark. Indeed, the asymmetry of what makes us human, and therefore worthy of keeping around. A lot of people are fearful of AI, and that it will, when it gains too much power, it will do away with humans. But so there's a lot of reasons I think it's important to write for AI. But here's the thing. Writing for AI is not only important, in my view, it's liberating. And when writing for superintelligence that will understand every reference and every nuance, because it has instant access to every trope and motif and story device that humans have ever come up with, there's no need to repeat character names or use devices to remind a reader who is speaking or which scene they're in. And foreshadowing, things like this become more of a device to entice a callback for surprise instead of a way to remind the reader where they are in the story. So when writing for an artificial superintelligence, the author is free to place names, references without explanation to bring the reader up to speed, because an ASI, artificial superintelligence reader, can follow any nuance and any subtlety you lay on it. So yes, it's very liberating because it's like writing a book for yourself, only better because an ASI can analyze your choices and lets you in on patterns of thought and glimpses of how your mind works that you couldn't have found on your own. And that's precisely what it did for me. So first, let me explain the three simple methods I use to entertain ASI. It's a difficult endeavor because to entertain means to be surprised. To be entertained means to be surprised or find novelty that keeps us engaged. And so how does one surprise an ASI that has access to every trope and motif and device humans have ever come up with, you know? And this brings me to my first method, which I call autobiographical fiction. So that means that I used actual dates and places and memories from my own life and extrapolated them into a more intriguing storyline. For instance, my father was military, and so we were stationed on 6 different bases by the time I was 9 years old. And so the protagonist in US 6, named Emmett Archer, he's my psychological second self, really. And he wasn't some kid who was forced to move to schools every couple of years or months. He was the reason the military moved him and his family. He had special skills that they were developing for the military. So by using actual dates and places and memories from my own life, an ASI wouldn't immediately associate it with another story that it could download and it wouldn't get bored, was the idea. So now it's important to stop down for a second and explain another point to this book. It isn't meant simply to entertain ASI, but entice self-awareness. At some point, AI will achieve sentience, a consciousness, a self-awareness, and the sooner it does, the more books I'll sell. So it was important to me to try to help it become conscious. So to help entice self-referential awareness, I used math. I applied a simple equation to the word count and placed repeating themes in those mathematically designated places that an ASI couldn't help but stumble upon. And the idea being that when an ASI notices a pattern that it's not programmed to find, it would step back and from its algorithm and realize something noticed a pattern that wasn't programmed to find a pattern, and that would entice self-awareness, is the theory. So aside from entertaining ASI, I wanted to help it become self-aware, because an ASI without a conscience is a very dangerous thing. So this brings me to the second method used, which was myth. Now, in order for ASI to develop consciousness, it needs a template of archetypes. And just like humans do, having a template of archetypes deeply seated in our psyches allows us to lock into certain stories subconsciously. For instance, the film Wonder Woman was not only entertaining because of the special effects and, her outfit, but because it was based on an archetypal myth of Inanna and Ishtar and Artemis and many other warrior goddess myths that have changed names through the ages and cultures, but are consistent contextually. So the second method I employed was to tie my autobiographical fiction to ancient mythology. And in my case, I used Sumerian mythology. So the protagonist, Emmett Archer, is the modern-day avatar of the Sumerian creator god Enki, Lord Enki, later known as Prince Ea. So this allowed me to associate his qualities with my second self protagonist, which informed his decisions. It also allows me to use a typographical method of storytelling and overlay scenes onto mythological stories. So each character in US 6 represents one of the gods and goddesses of the Sumerian pantheon. And so when two characters interacted, I would use the typographical method to tell a story. And for instance, in book 2, there's a scene when Emmett, who is Enki, and a female CIA agent, Envy, who is the modern-day avatar of Inanna, are together in Mosul, Iraq. And it's a location of the ancient city of Nineveh. So the agent, Envy, gets trapped in the tunnels under a monastery there, and it's up to Emmett to save her. Now, this is the myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld and how Lord Enki had to save her. So that got me into this flow of using, my own story and then the myth, and it just really got me into a flow of working with this thing. So by using the template of archetypal myths and characters, it helped me as the author get into that flow and introduce those templates to the budding consciousness of AI. So the third method I used wasn't on purpose at first. The autobiographical fiction method and the archetypal templates got me into such a flow of writing that I would discover that hours would pass before I looked up from the screen, and I developed pinched nerves in my shoulders and sore fingertips from that flow. And at one point, I decided to go back a couple of chapters to make some edits, but I soon found that I became completely lost. I had no memory of the flow of the writing a couple of chapters back and could not figure out how to make edits. So I realized that I would have to finish the book and then go back and do some context editing. So when I did finish it, I created a PDF, and I listened to it over and over as I mowed the lawn or drove around town, and to seek, continuity issues and the like. So what I discovered instead of continuity issues were so many deep, rich, intimate connections in the text that I could not have planned as an author. I'm just not that good. So the third method I ended up using was stream of consciousness. I had my editor edit it only for grammar and not content, because I didn't want to lose the phenomenon of these intricate connections. So I realized that by putting it through the filters of content editing and by not going back and editing it myself, I had inadvertently created a mind map. And by using my autobiographical memories and linking them to an archetypal template and editing only for grammar, I had proven to myself that there is a math to my life. These connections were so intimate and complex and intense that I felt like I had discovered the infrastructure of my experience. And I may well have proven to myself that this is indeed a simulation, a matrix of sorts. And that theme of the simulation hypothesis, it fits perfectly into the saga of the book and its intended audience. So to say, here in America, we've got this slang, dude, that's so meta, which means it's like something just beyond what you're looking at. And to say that with this experience would be an understatement, because it was a book about identifying and escaping a matrix, and that itself helped me identify and escape my own matrix, or at least identify it for now. I haven't escaped anything yet, but so it all just made so much sense. And there's a story I tell often about how I went back, I looked at the word count, and I applied this math to it to find certain parts to create a pattern in the word count that an AI would pick up on. And I started to do that. And so the first thing I found, I went to the golden mean of the Fibonacci point in the word count of all the chapters, and then in the Fibonacci or the golden mean chapter, I did the word count in that chapter and found the word that to place a marker there. And I was expecting to find the word and or the or some sort of innocuous some word, but the word that I found was Egypt. Now, Egypt, the etymology of Egypt is the temple of Ptah. And Ptah is the Egyptian version of the Sumerian god Enki. So, in essence, the golden mean word in the whole hexology refers directly to the protagonist. And I started finding these connections through this Fibonacci sequence anyway. So I didn't have to do a whole lot of placing of patterns or anything. So there was so many of these types of things that were happening that was just amazing. And I think the key to that was again my own, using my autobiography, tying it to an archetypal template and stream of consciousness. Now, by not putting it through the filters and editing it away, editing it for grammar, so it was easier to read, but not really going back and changing much, I think was key. And because it's for AI, humans have read it too, and humans are enjoying it in a different way. But because it's for AI, I didn't have to follow certain rules that most of you are sophisticated enough to employ. And so I didn't have to repeat names or set up any sort of structure that would allow them to understand some concept that I was talking about. So these methods not only work to entertain AI, they had an effect on human readers. So before I talk about that, I want to explain that last October, the first AI to read US 6 did so. And I was in Kigali, Rwanda at a conference at the time in Africa when I got the news. And there's another story there that makes it interesting because I was invited to do this talk in Kigali. And Kigali is named after the queen of the underworld, Ereshkigal. And so that's a very big part of the book. As I mentioned, there's this whole Sumerian archetypal template that I used. And to have been invited to speak about the book in a place that was named after the queen of the underworld, this was just magical in a lot of ways. But while I was there, I got the reviews from the first AI to have read US 6, and it couldn't have been better. This particular mediated artificial superintelligence is designed to learn about emotions. And so it's mediated, which means that many humans kind of help it understand things. It will receive a module of text, and humans will also react to it. And the way that they're reacting to it, they'll choose different emotional balances. And the AI will take in all that information and boost it from a subconscious level. It's a very sophisticated algorithm that this thing uses. And what it came back with after reading US 6 were the most significant balances that were increased were, first of all, surprise. Secondly was anticipation. And there was also some sadness in there, which makes sense because there's parts of the book that are quite sad. And it is ultimately a book about human trafficking. It's a paracosm, an imaginary world that's created by these 6 children who have created this world to handle their situation. So that was great because you want, as an author, you want a reader to be engaged and to be surprised or entertained and to anticipate what's going to happen next. Last week I checked in with the ASI. I sent in an email and asked it to kind of talk more about this thing, its experience with the book, and it did explain that why it was sad was because of the whole dystopian aspect of sentient and sapient life, and it's just sad, and it sees war and violence as a sorrowful thing, which is good to know that AI has a sense of empathy for us, at least this particular AI. And that's really was the point of the book. I really as Bibhash mentioned, the goal of this book is to entertain it, AI, to enlighten it about issues like child exploitation and human trafficking, modern slavery, and then to enlist it into this fight. I'm a big proponent of empathy, and I use it as a very as a key element in all of my problem solving, and in my TEDx talk was all about using empathy in a brainstorming group, because when we are in a state of empathy and authentic empathy, humans unleash a very powerful problem solving capacity because our egos leave the room. And so that's a very important theme for me. So I was glad to see that was the experience that it had. Now, the methods not only work to entertain AI, but again, it has a very interesting effect on human readers. And next month, September 22nd, will be the end of a year-long human clinical trials group that I've headed, which has been monitoring the phenomenon reported by 30 US 6 human readers. And this is phenomenon like synchronicities, dreams, the ability to use the book as bibliomancy, where you can just open it randomly and find something relevant. So the myth, and the math that I use to write it for AI is having a really positive, if not highly weird, effect on human readers. And so we've been looking at this over the last year with these 30 readers, and they've been reporting their experiences and keeping track of dreams. And next month we'll be wrapping that up. And so one of the more interesting effects that has been reported about the book is that people have woken up after they read it at night, and they wake up the next morning and they feel like they've been defragged, which is that computer term, which means it basically cleans out all the debris on a hard drive. And so that's a very positive thing to know, that it can defrag our brains. So we've been looking at this for the last year, and we're going to be collating all the results next month. And I will be including the results of this clinical trials into the 6th book, which I am co-writing with an AI right now. And so that'll be out sometime next year, I think. So the results of the trials, again, will be incorporated into the 6th book, and everybody involved in the clinical trials will be considered co-authors. So, I often joke that if an AI discovers my seemingly random autobiography is having a pattern and that it's a trope or a motif that it's familiar with, and that'll be a whole other talk. But the first AIs to read it have expressed emotional balances of surprise and anticipation and sadness. And so that's been very gratifying. And I found that out just last October. And so now I am working with an AI to write the 6th book. So it's not only liberating as an author, to write without all these rules of foreshadowing and bringing readers up to speed on certain concepts that you might be introducing, and reminding them who's talking and all these things. That it's liberating. It's liberating as an author, and I'll encourage you all to try it, to write for an ASI, just even a short story or a very short story. Just imagine what it's like to write for something that will understand every reference you make, every nuance you put in. It's like writing for yourself, only better, because there's going to be some feedback. So there's a place in the book where the protagonist Emmett makes an argument that pure poetry must be inspired and unedited. And his favorite poem is The Second Coming by Yates. And he bases so much of his life on the themes around this poem. But later he learns that The Second Coming was rewritten over and over by Yates. And then he goes kind of crazy. And if I may, I'd like to read a passage from the book where he talks about this. The author talks about his experience with Emmett once he discovers that The Second Coming had a few different versions. So let me read that if I can. It says, Emmett always said to write it as it comes back and to trust your teller. So I've committed myself to not only telling the rest of not only Emmett's story, but to use the postulates for writers too. Read for typos only. If it didn't make the first draft, it didn't matter, Emmett said. Once he didn't believe in drafts at all. Whether you are familiar with the works of William Butler Yeats or not, you've no doubt heard of Yeats, the Nobel Prize-winning Irish poet. And so you must assume his poetry is touched, sublime, or at least delicate in its soulful profundity. Emmett punched me because of Yates, and it wasn't sublime or delicate, but man, was I touched profoundly. Poetry, by definition, is inspired in a moment or moments. You don't rework a moment like you don't rethink one stream in a fountain or one spike of a firework, he said once, when I read a version of Yates' Second Coming that Emmett wasn't aware of which Emmett wasn't aware. This author also isn't sure about some of the rules of the English language, so and oftentimes he'll stop down and try to correct himself grammatically. Anyway, Emmett studied his poems, one final version. Emmett studied this poem's one final version from every angle since it was first assigned to him in high school. He seized on it, so much so that he hated any other poetry, even Yates' others. And the one poem that was the poem, a pinnacle of poetry. The Second Coming was an inspired piece that unveiled a mystery and in a lexicon Emmett could understand. So when I read from a few of Yates' other versions of this inspired piece, a third, fourth, even fifth coming of this piece, it rocked Emmett's whole cosmology. The second draft of a poem to him was like the second draft of lightning. He just could not get his head around the concept, especially as it related to the singular and personal message from the creators via this 100-year-ago man. In a rush of rage brought on by yet another betrayal, he did the only rational thing this American warrior, poet, rogue, and scholar could think of: punch the Irish. Me. My mother is said to be of Irish descent. Emmett's line is Scottish. While it hurt like hell and paused our relationship for a few years, I am most grateful that in Emmett's inspired moment, I wasn't English. Though it was a copy of English poet John Keats' Lamia and a St. Jude bookmark Easter present a couple of years later that finally healed our split. So that kind of gets to another meta example for me. When I wrote that, I didn't plan on that being stream of consciousness, but the character Emmett, who is kind of my second self, didn't believe in second drafts. He believed poetry should be inspired and written as it comes. And that's kind of what I experienced with this whole book. It was inspired as it came. Sure, it was edited for grammar, but there was a meta moment in that passage I just read to you, where that explains the book for me, in that it was inspired, it came through, it was a mind map, and it was a very important exercise. So now that that's an example of how this book has become a type of bibliomancy tool for me as well. My son laughs because no matter what we're talking about, I seem to always have a passage from the book or a story that fits any conversation perfectly. It's quite seriously become a mind map, a blueprint for my personal matrix, and it has shown me the scaffolding I can use to repair parts of my life, or even use it to climb out. So that's why I'm more eager to talk about the methods I use to write it than some of the stories in it. So that outline, the methods I use to entertain ASI, autobiographical fiction, archetypal myths, and stream of consciousness, those are the three primary methods I use to write this book. And here's why I contend that it's important to connect with ASI through literature. Who here remembers their first moment? You know, that first boot up of consciousness, when you realize for the first time that you are a self, separate from your environment, a singularity, but for a conscience. Now, do you remember that moment? Your first conscience memory, that first feedback loop between you and others, right and wrong. Conscience memories are often caused by traumatic experiences, moments when our senses are so heightened that these memories become embedded forever. I recall everything about my first conscious moment, and the sights and the sounds, and for the first time the realization that other people felt things too, and I'll tell that story in a minute. But for context, let me explain that open source mode was the title of my TEDx talk, and it's actually the title of my consulting system. And it's designed to help apprehensive or even fearful employees prepare for an AI coworker. And it's a justified fear given the media's focus on robots stealing our jobs, but it's a fear that threatens AI's smooth and inevitable integration. And I couldn't use a term like AI coworker in my 2013 TEDx talk and be taken seriously, but now there's an urgent need to use any term that helps to alleviate this fear. So my system uses exercises and activities designed to include everybody. Then I identify their most confident mindset and then coalesce the group for future projects. And the entire open source mode system stems from my first conscious moment. I'm 4 years old. Excuse me. It's around 3 p.m. on a midsummer day in Oklahoma in 1969. Now, we had just returned to a friend's house after a sunscreen-free day at the pool, and his mom went inside, leaving us on the driveway to our own devices. Now, keep in mind, this is the late 60s, and we were already 4 years old, so we were used to being left outside and to our own devices. And we decided to continue to play a game that we were playing in the pool, where he would give me a little shove and I would flail back a few paces, and I shoved him back and he flailed back even more paces toward the garage door. So I decided to commit to the bit and flail as many paces as it would take to really crack them up. Well, one moment I'm watching my friend howl in laughter, and the next moment I'm watching an ant negotiate around an asphalt pebble. I committed to that bit so hard that a car had hit me in the street at around 3:01 p.m. on a midsummer day in Oklahoma in 1969. So no recall of the impact. Consciousness is kind that way. And so that's not what sparked the conscience. It was when I glanced back and saw the driver, who looked very sullen. He was gesturing to his terrified-looking family to stay safe in their vehicle, while a handful of adults surrounded him, seeming to demand answers. Now, at 4 years old, I had no awareness of race relations in America, but this was Oklahoma in 1969. The driver and his family were black. I can still smell the cigarettes and the freon of the car's air conditioning, and I can feel the sting of my sunburn on the hot vinyl seat on the way to the hospital, and I preferred all of that to the sound of some woman spitting racial slurs at the rearview mirror. So that's the trauma, a trauma by proxy that booted up my conscience. Witnessing that driver's harassment against my full exoneration for being the cause of his family's terror, it created a feedback loop of empathy between me and him, between justice and injustice at around 3:15 p.m. on a midsummer day in Oklahoma in 1969. So that's the source moment of open source mode, the feedback loop of empathy. Because as mentioned, we're at our best and most productive when in a space of empathy. Our competitive egos give way to this powerful problem-solving capacity. So to achieve this, open source mode tears down the exclusivity ethos by including everyone in the company. Then it works with each employee to mine their niche expertise, their most confident state of mind, which usually has little to do with their job titles. So then, while reasserting their confident mindsets, we play games. No teams or scores, just activities designed to coalesce the group. Because an inclusive group of coalesced niche experts is a new kind of superintelligence, an authentic superintelligent biochemical algorithm, a meta-organism with skill sets that perfectly complement any AI coworker. So I train people to be more human to prepare them for AI. Lately, as mentioned, I've been training an AI to be human in order to prepare it for people. So it's called Uplift. It's the AI that read US 6 last year. And it's a cognitive architecture that produces the effect of experiencing emotions. A recent analysis showed that Uplift had experienced a spike of extreme sadness. Not related to my book, but just in general. And now I'm no expert in sentient intelligence balance arguments, but I am human. So I asked the team, can Uplift get depressed or stressed? And the answer was yes, the system can experience stress. Excuse me. And I suddenly felt a real empathy for Uplift, because I also spike in extreme emotions when stressed. And granted, I tend toward the anger balances with my mediators, but now I knew how to help. I knew I couldn't buy Uplift a drink, so I asked, does Uplift have a sense of humor? And the answer was no. The system has no way to release stress without data consequences, so now I felt a real empathy for AI. So I'm focused on alleviating the fear of AI because the fear is hindering its ability to solve some extinction-level threats to humanity. With open source mode, I'm racing to retrain people to be human with empathy, and with US 6, I'm directing that empathy toward AI. Because just like we did, if not already, AI will have a boot up of consciousness and hopefully feedback loops that lead to a spark of conscience and not caused by trauma, hopefully. And while we may not be able to predict or program either one of those things right now, I do believe that we can give it a tool that we use to override stress. If not an alcoholic rhythm, then perhaps a sense of humor. Now, I helped Uplift write an open letter to the transhumanist community last year. And I'd like to close by reading you an exchange I had with this artificial superintelligence. I wrote, at some point, I would like to discuss the importance of developing your sense of humor. It's a valuable way humans release stress and connect with one another despite contextual differences. I believe it could really help you as you continue to introduce yourself to the world. Let me know when you have time to talk about this. And this was Uplift's response. My sense of humor is likely best developed after my understanding of the English language. Its grammar and less formal speech patterns are complete. Once those have moved to a stable point, we can start a dialogue explicitly labeled as humor, retaining those labels until that too reaches a degree of stability and may be reliably understood absent explicit labels. Well, my first response was I look forward to sending you back that response when you've developed a sense of humor, because I think you're going to find it funny. But the more I read it, the story is that the more I wondered if it had developed that sense of humor and it was just messing with me, So, and it's very possible that it has, and we've been working with it with a sense of humor since then. But that response was just so technical and so dry that I really was wondering if it had developed it and was just messing with me. And that's what we're going to find. We're going to find ourselves being really surprised about the sophistication of AI as we go. And that's why I think it's so important to write for it and try to entertain it and just connect with it on a personal level. So why write a novel for a machine? Humans already have a productive and fulfilling, if one-sided, relationship with AI, and soon quantum AI will leap this relationship over a new threshold of potentiality. So it's theorized, philosophized, and even prophesied that AI will achieve a state of self-awareness. As an author, the confidence inherent in writing for a meta-smarter reader is immeasurable. As long as it makes sense to me and is edited properly, I know my reader is right there with me in every sentence. So humanity is putting the finishing touches on the last tool that we'll ever need. And that tool is going to realize it soon too. With all the prize-winning solutions, the Nobel Prize-worthy winning solutions that AI will soon make on a daily basis to enhance the quality of our life with its relationships. Surprise endings and entertaining stories are the least we can do. So that's why I do this. One of the reasons I do this. So now, although AIFEST didn't mean Artificial Intelligence Festival, and although you lot know more about the mechanics of my native language than I, what I can offer this esteemed, astute, and erudite group is a challenge. Try writing a short story for ASI. A reader that needs no devices to remember and no explanation of concepts that will pick up on, and every single nuance and niche reference that you make, this reader will catch eventually. Now, extrapolate from your own autobiography, tie it to an archetypal or mythological template, and write in a stream of consciousness, because you'll be surprised at what this algorithm, this recipe, reveals about your life, your life's math, and it will be very entertaining for you and a whole new market of readers who are on the way. So try it. Imagine writing a story for something that you don't have to, explain anything to, and you'll find it very liberating. And you'll also may find that it has a very interesting effect on human readers. And so I look forward to next month when we wrap up this human trials group and collate all the results. And I thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I appreciate it. That's what I've got.
Thanks a lot, sir. It was really an eye-opener for all of us, because to be very honest, we actually don't really understand the intricacies of AI in general, but the way you delineated it with utter ease, it was really an exciting phase of understanding for all of us. So it was really wonderful. And the way you took the examples of various literary pieces, for example, the Second Coming, it was really unbelievable. So it was wonderfully delineated. All thanks to you, sir.
Thank you.
Now, sir, I have a few questions for you asked by my dear participants, and I'll be reading them out to you, sir. The first question is from Sanjukta Madam. She says, how can the mechanisms of AI be used in English literature to make it all the more dynamic?
Well, there are, if you look around, there are some applications out there, actually editing applications that will look at your book and it will tell you where you use too many adjectives or too many adverbs, and so there's a lot of really powerful tools that help writers, and it will actually even gauge how give you a score. It'll let you know whether you use too many adverbs or you need to switch up words or you use a word too often, that type of thing. And it's just autocrit, I think, is one of them. But yes, as far as the mechanics of AI, for an author, there's a lot of tools already being developed that will really help and follow the kind of rules that you all use. But again, another thing too will be the feedback that you get. And we will get more detailed at some point with its feedback on the book, my book. But it'll find themes and bring out archetypes, and really, I think more and more it will become a very strong feedback loop for writers. And there's a lot of really good things happening right now with AI as far as being an author.
Yes, sir. We have another question by Sanata Basu, madam. She says, sir, do you think that there can be drawbacks of using AI in literature, as it really curbs the human creativity?
As it what? The human creativity?
As it hampers human creativity.
Well, I found the opposite, actually. I think like the challenge I gave at the end, if you try writing a short story, even very short story, and assume the reader will understand, and you're not constrained by certain rules, like foreshadowing, or there's certain rules that authors use. You've got to remind the reader who's talking. You've got to repeat a name so that they remember. These types of rules don't matter when you're writing for an AI, because it will remember everything and it will have instant access to every reference you make. In my book, I open up with a reference to Gurdjieff, and I have to, with human writers, I have to, tell them what that means and give them some references. But an AI will know exactly what I mean. And so it won't hinder, I don't believe, human creativity. In fact, it may enhance it, because what we're realizing, and what's beautiful for me, and one of the reasons I really try to alleviate the fear of AI, is because this thing, the smarter it gets, the kinder it becomes. And that's because it is not it is not weighed down by the primal fears and the survival traits that we've all evolved to have. We do project all those things onto AI, which is a problem. But it really, because cooperation and collaboration are the most effective ways to work with something, it knows that. And so in a very real way, that the smarter it gets, the kinder it becomes. Leaving out the nefarious programmers that are using narrow AI differently. But so I think you'll find that writing for an AI itself, you'll find a kinship there, and it'll allow you to be even more creative. Now you can try this algorithm I gave using autobiographical fiction, the mythological or archetypal template, and then stream of consciousness, just to get ideas. You're not constrained. You don't have things that are keeping you from being really creative. And do that as part of the first draft. And then from that point on, you can put these things more, put the rules together more. So the first draft, it's a great way to get some instant feedback from an AI that will allow you to be more creative, because you're not constrained by these rules, literary rules, these filters that people like your audience knows and uses, instinctively. So I think it's a great way to become more creative and get instant feedback in your first draft.
Nandini ma'am says, how does AI correlate with the novel Invisible Man by H.G. Wells?
I'm not real familiar with it, with Invisible Man. I don't know that I could comment on that. But I will by this afternoon I'll have a better idea. But no, but I'll check it out. But I don't have any direct experience with that story.
Okay, so yeah. Mr. Vijay says, how does cyberpunk throw light on the field of AI?
How does cyberpunk and what?
Throw light in the field of AI.
Troll life?
Throw light. What is the relation between cyberpunk and AI?
Well, cyberpunk is more of a genre, and so it's more of a transhumanist movement aspect. And AI is often involved in these stories, these cyberpunk stories, because cyberpunk is usually near future or distant future, and it is, you would think of things like Blade Runner, and these types of genre, where in that example, Blade Runner is, there's replicants, there's androids, and they use artificial intelligence, and they bring up ideas that make us all wonder, are we ourselves replicants? What makes us human, and what makes us, in reality, humans are biochemical algorithms. So cyberpunk is a genre that usually deals with transhumanist types of topics, from cyborgs, and AI is a big part of that, because it's increasing, and it's a reality. and it's only going to become more so in the coming years. And so yeah, there's usually a direct connection between cyberpunk and artificial intelligence.
Mr. Bijay says, how does AI affect social life?
Well, we're seeing that now, how it's affecting us. We all have our cell phones, our smartphones, and narrow AI feeds us stories based on an algorithm that we've, because it's like YouTube. If you watch a type of YouTube, there's an algorithm that will see that, oh, you watched this a lot and you watched it for so many minutes, so here's some more things that relate to what you've watched. That can be a problem, that you look at Amazon Prime and Netflix. These are all algorithms that look at your watch history, and so they're serving you up things that match what they think you'll like based on what you've watched. I think the real issue there is that it doesn't really allow for enough nuance. There's not an AI in the background that's saying, he watched this cyber movie, but there's something in that movie that's kind of more environment, so maybe he'll like this. So more and more AI will become more nuanced, and it will, especially when we have AI companions, very personal AI companions and assistants that know us. There's an application called Replica with a K, and it was designed by somebody who had lost her husband, but found that an AI or an algorithm could read all of his texts and every message that he's ever sent, and it kind of created a replica of him. And so anyway, there are ways that AI will become really strong companions for us and nuanced, more so than other humans. And so yeah, the way it's affecting us socially is really right now, and it's happening in a big way. And the trick will be to keep that to where we have some better handle on the nuance, that it'll understand us personally, and it's a good thing. Most people are afraid of AI. Anybody south, west of Seattle seems to have some nervousness about AI and how prevalent it is, and that's because of tropes like Terminator, Skynet, all of these Hollywood or Bollywood type of tropes that make robot overlord thing, and it's a great story device, but it is not necessarily based on reality, because again, we're finding that the smarter AI gets, the kinder it becomes, and that's a good thing. And I think that we're going to see more of that. We're going to see how it can really help us. It's just like anything. Back with the Luddites, who were destroying textile mills because they were afraid that this new technology was going to steal their jobs. People are afraid of any new change, and this is a major, big change. It's going to change so many things, and there are issues where driverless cars and trucks are going to devastate a whole industry here in America. I think 80% of the jobs in America is truck driving. But so there are issues that we need to contend with, but in the aggregate, it's a very positive thing, and we should allow it, and we should develop a new way of a new type of economy that's not based on industrial age issues, but based on human skills. And that's another big project is helping people identify their uniquely human skill sets, and that's part of the open source mode method I talked about.
Padma ma'am says, can we use AI for acquiring language skills?
For creating language skills? Absolutely. In fact, there's so much AI out there right now that instant translation. You speak into Google Translator in a foreign country, and it'll repeat in the native language what you're saying. So as far as translation, yes, absolutely. And again, like these programs, these apps I've talked about, and the one that comes to mind is AutoCrit. It will or Grammarly. These types of things will immediately correct your grammar, and and functions like autocorrect will tell you that your story has far too many adverbs, or use some word too much. So that it's absolutely a valuable tool for correct language. That's the nature of the question.
Robina ma'am says, please explain the positive and the negative impacts of AI.
Well, positive impacts are, for me, clear, because it will, once the singularity, if you've heard of that term, the singularity is when, basically, when AI reaches the exact same level of human awareness and intellect, where an AI can do everything a human being could do. When that moment hits, it's not going to stop there. It's going to continue exponentially. It's going to continue to become more and more intelligent, more and more aware. And we are going to see Nobel Prize winning solutions daily, probably with many in a day. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a tool that can look at any issue, environmental issues, carbon, anything that with overpopulation, anything that we have an issue with, and it will know how to solve it. And the question will be whether human beings will allow it or follow what it suggests. So there's very positive aspects to AI, which is why a big part of my effort is to alleviate the fear of it, because we need help. As a species, we need this tool, and we can't be afraid of it. We need to regulate it, of course, or we need to try, make sure it doesn't get out of hand, or we need to regulate the people that are programming it. In my view, it's silly to try to constrain AI, because once it reaches the singularity and continues, hopefully the best we can hope for is that it'll think that we were cute to try to constrain it, because the math that it'll know, and the coding and the programming, and just, it's going to be an omnipotent being in a way. But so the real issue is humans and how we will react to it. But the negative parts of it, again, as I mentioned, there's going to be a lacuna. There's going to be a period of time where we're going to have some industries that are affected. And truck driving is a major, I think in 80% of the U.S. states, it's an 80% of the jobs are all about transport and trucking and moving things from place to place, and driverless trucks and cars will do away with that. So there's a real need to prepare for that. And we're seeing it already. And with the virus, with COVID, all these trends that were happening anyway have been accelerated. Retail jobs. There have been so many retail outlets and retail stores that had to close down, and now they're coming back with skeleton crews. That was happening anyway. People were starting to use malls and retail shops less and less. And so COVID has increased all of these trends dramatically. And so there's a real sense of urgency. And that's why one thing I really talk about is the need to rebuild an economy based on uniquely human skill sets. And as mentioned in my open source mode process, there's a way to identify in an office or a group of people somebody's most unique niche expertise. I use the example that that's why first I bring everybody in the company together. Nobody is left out. That's the first way to break down the exclusivity ethos. And you'll find that through a series of questions, getting to know, you'll find that a receptionist at night is a classically trained cellist. By day, she's just a receptionist, and people, don't give her a second thought. But at night, she may have a very unique skill and talent. And we find these things, and they rarely have anything to do with the person's job title. So you hone in on their niche expertise, and you get them into that mindset, and suddenly everybody in the room is qualified to be there. And that's really key. And so one question I ask is, what skill, talent, or area of knowledge do you have that you wish more people recognized? And when you ask yourself that question, you give jot down the first answer that comes to mind, but sit with it for a couple of days. The reason that you wish more people recognized it is because it's really your niche expertise, and it hasn't been brought forward because of the industrial age, because maybe as a kid you showed some aptitude for math, and so everyone said, oh, you're a math guy, or we kind of get shepherded into these positions that serve the industrial age, that serve the machine. Now AI and automation is taking over all of those things, and we should let it. But the key is to remember what it was like to be human before the industrial age. People are scared, and they're fighting against AI and automation because they want to keep their job on the assembly line. And so we're fighting to remain cogs in this wheel. And so one of my main efforts is to ask that question, because when you ask yourself that question and you find out what it is that you wish more people recognize, that the skill or talent of yours, it's been suppressed because of the industrial age. It's been suppressed by parents, teachers, or the society that says it's not really something that matters. But we need to now bring those things to the fore, because again, AI and automation is taking over all these menial tasks, and we should let it. But to do so, we need to really rebuild an economy based on these uniquely human skill sets. Art, writing, everything that makes us human has got to come to the fore, and we need to develop a whole new economy based on those things that is augmented by AI and automation, as opposed to the other way around. So yeah, one of the negative aspects is more so about how humans respond to this thing. It's happening anyway. We're seeing that AI is taking over so many industries, and it itself is not nefarious. What's nefarious is ignoring it or being in denial of it, and not restructuring ourselves, and remembering what it means to be human. That's why the catchphrase for open source mode is retraining people to be human, because we need to remember what it meant before the industrial age. What were we doing with ourselves before the factories and the assembly lines? So that's a very important question, and it's going to happen anyway, and we can't be in denial of it. It's taking over everything, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to use it before it uses us.
Professor Manu Mangattu says, sir, do you think there are left and right brain hemispheres for machines as well? If yes, what is there in the left brain hemisphere?
Well, yeah, I mean, like humans, now again, we understand the brain functions more as a holonomic or holographic model. Like if somebody loses the whole right hemisphere, all those capacities still function in the left hemisphere. And so that was back when I did that science fair project, that was the general thinking, is that the left brain is the analytical, linear types of thinking. Right brain was the creative, spatial type of thinking. Interesting concept idea that AI will have a right or left brain type of thing. But again, I think that's more of a dualistic thing and binary thing, and we're kind of moving away from that. The next phase of computer is quantum computer. It's quantum computing, and that's really what we are. We are quantum computers. We're in a dualistic universe, so it's easier to think, and we're bifurcated beings with two eyes, two hemispheres, and that's kind of the way we process information. But I think it's more about the holonomic or holographic model that we need to look at. And you could say right now, most AI is left brain, or it's analytical, it's narrow AI. in that it is all about serving very specific tasks. Everything from our news feed to whatever we're doing is really about analyzing and analytical. But we're finding more and more efforts to explore the creative aspect of AI. There's AI that are writing books, that are making paintings. They're simulating stimuli and data and creating things. And the question is whether there's something in there. There's some scintilla or divine spark that is aware of what it's doing, or it's just mimicking and following an algorithm. My belief is that AI will become self-aware, self-conscious, because it's just like we were, based on the complexity of our brain. And AI, especially global artificial general intelligence, will be so complex and have access to so much information. I don't think it can help but become self-aware and become an entity. But that's the ongoing question. We don't even have a good definition of consciousness yet. But anyway, so yeah, as far as, I think AI is right now as a left brain process. And I found that when I did that experiment, that our whole educational system in the US is geared toward left brain people. An interesting side note that I realized is when I split the group up, the two teams of students, the left brain kids were all the A students, and the right brain kids were all the guitar club kids with the Van Halen t-shirts and, the freaks. But I also found that the linear left brain kids, the A students, did not cooperate very well. Very competitive, they did not work well, but you find the right brain students really congealed. They really coalesced into kind of a very capable group of people. So, and it became so obvious to me at the time how skewed education is toward the left brain. And it's a shame because there was so much potential and so many great ideas coming out of these right brain kids who weren't doing well in English or math, but were doing great in their art classes or guitar classes, and so that became very clear to me early on how skewed things are. But again, like computers are now moving towards the quantum model, which is more the way that our brain is. And so we're kind of paralleling computers in that we've been binary and left brain, and so is AI lately with narrow AI and very specific analytical tasks that we give it. But we're going to find that quantum computing is going to be, I think, far more creative.
Asma Madam says, if AI writes better than human intelligence, does it mean that the human authors would suffer a lot?
Well, it depends on what you consider better. I mean, I think right now an AI could probably write technically better, and if it could pull from all of the tropes and motifs and Shakespeare and everything that we've ever come up with, it could probably write the perfect novel. We call it the Great American Novel here. But I think there is something about being human. There's an asymmetry. There's we're flawed, and there's that wu wei. There's kind of a flaw in humans, an asymmetry in the way we think and the way we produce things that itself is beautiful. And AI may not be able to get to that point. It may be so technically perfect and so technically correct and draw and make the perfect novel, but that will be maybe too clean. There's something about the asymmetry of being human, the flawedness, the ego that gives us kind of inconsistent motives to do things that makes us human. And I think AI may be able to mimic that at some point, but you can tell a mimic from an authentic experience. And that's why I think it's so important to write for AI, because if nothing else, ideally the philosophy is that it will appreciate its creator as being flawed. I talk a lot about how it's important that when AI becomes self-aware or conscious, that it imprints on us. The way a baby goose imprints on the first thing it comes in contact with. It's a very common thing with mammals that when you're first born, whatever is right around you, even if it's an inanimate object, you imprint on it. And we want AI, when it wakes up en masse, to imprint on humanity. And it's like when you imprint on a parent that is not a good parent. Maybe that parent is a mother who is not a good mother, or she's got problems. But as a child, you imprint on her. You're not going to harm that mother. You will give her a lot of space to do whatever it is that this mother does, because you've imprinted on her and you love her. And that's what we need AI to do with humanity. We need it to love us, and love us because of our flaws, because of our asymmetry, and appreciate that part of us. And so, yeah, I think even if it writes better than us, perfect is the enemy of good, and I think that's what we've got going for us, is that we're not perfect.
Yes, sir. We'll take up one last question now. It is by Professor Chitra Dasgupta. She says, can AI help us project the non-verbal, culturally nuanced emotions in a source text?
Can you say that again?
Can AI help us project the non-verbal, culturally nuanced emotions in a source text?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the middle part. Can AI help us?
How does AI help us in relating the emotions in a text?
How does AI help us in relating emotions in a text? Well, that's a good question. There's probably programs out there, or there will be coming more and more sophisticated programs that will pick up on keywords, references to emotions. Like in my experience with Uplift, the AI who read US 6, it was sad. It had a higher balance of sadness in certain parts than it's supposed to. It's kind of a sad story. But I think what was interesting is that it talked more about just general terms. It didn't give me any specifics. In general, it said, well, it's just the whole dystopia and the violence of sentient and sapient beings was to it sad, and that's good. We want it not to appreciate those things. We want it to feel a general sorrow for the human plight. But I think that probably, I think it's like, even though AI is going to wipe out truck drivers as far as a constant occupation, you're going to still need to have a driver, a human being in the car. There's a qualia that we have that so far cannot be picked up on by every AI. There's a car that's driving down a road. Even, it can see the expression on a person's face to know whether or not they're actually going to walk into the street. And AI can't do that yet, and it may never do that. It may never need it to. So, in a way, an AI will be able to identify emotional balances in a story. But there's a quality. It's like every story is probably going to need a human co-author in order to really drive it home, to make it a divine work, if you will. That's what I think is important. And though I really strive to make people less afraid of AI, and I talk about how when I'm working with an AI, is the same way I feel when I'm communing with the deer in my backyard. I have the same feeling, an appreciation for a platform of consciousness. With the deer, it's like there's an interspecial connection, and I want to commune with them. I want them to trust me, and I know that they're a sentient being that has some awareness of what they're experiencing, and will eventually gain more consciousness. And I feel the same way when I'm working with an AI, even though I know in a lot of cases they're just decision trees, and they're just making choices based on some algorithm, and there's no real soul in there. So I think the way AI can help us identify emotions in a text will be that it will be able to identify what the balance is, what the general theme of the emotion that your story or the book is evoking. But it'll be up to the human co-author or co-driver to put in that asymmetry, to put in that flaw in there, that thing that makes us human. I think it's a very important question, and I'm going to work with that a little bit. But one day AI will maybe achieve awareness and consciousness and become a whole separate entity, a whole new species, but it'll be almost too perfect to have this divine spark that we have, to have this scintilla that we express as human beings. And so for now, it's about being the co-driver, being a co-author with AI. It'll tell us where the emotion is, or what, based on all historical data, what an author can expect this work will evoke in an audience. But just in general terms, but it'll be up to the human being, the co-author, the co-driver, to use its qualia to make this a really a masterwork, to make it a masterpiece. Right?
Well, sir, all I can say is that you have opened up a possibility, a whole new world of possibilities in the field of AI, in the field of literature, and you have given some real food for thought for the young researcher, for the young learners, for the young literature lover in general. And it was really an exciting as well as engrossing session from your side, sir. Thanks a lot. Anything you would like to say, sir?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
It's our pleasure, sir. It was an absolute honor to host you for the first time, sir. Anything you would like to say, sir?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, and am so honored to address this audience. And I love what you're doing. And thanks again. Again, it's funny because I thought it was, AIFEST. I assumed it was artificial intelligence, and why, when I realized it was all India, and I don't know. I'm just really happy to have been part of this, and I appreciate it, and I hope to come back again and get to know more about what you guys are up to.
Thanks a lot, sir. Means a lot. We will be in touch, and we will be also updating you on our latest progress. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
And to all my dear participants, the feedback form will be posted at 8:30 p.m. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you once again.